well. Did you guys install SoapUI? If you haven't, you can just double click on the downloaded exe, just go through next, and you'll be done.
Should we considering here the first name, last name? Let's go on the just click.
Yep. So you'll see a screen like this, right? Yes, no, are you able to see that? Like a screen like this? Yes, no? Okay, good. So you can see, what is saying REST API sample project, right? You can do REST API with this as well, like you did with Postman. You can do SoapUI API as well. And then you can do Amazon Web Service as well. Okay, so this tool helps you to do anything. In Postman also, you can do some testing, but slightly difficult, okay, compared to this tool. But you can use any tool, right? Typically, an organization, when they invest in one tool which gives them everything. Postman is nowadays more popular because REST API is more popular. So nobody is designing or developing SOAP services anymore. I mean, maybe very hardly few organizations will be doing that. But there are a lot of organizations who already have the SOAP services. So, if you wanted to test it, you need to know, how to test the SOAP services. Okay. So we are going to use a sample, very simple web service, which is exposed by a sample website. And we are going to use that service for our lab. Okay. It's a calculator basically deployed on the web as a service where you can do like calculations like add, subtract, divide and multiply and things like that. Okay. So let's start. Let me also start another presentation which is about the tool itself. So let's see this. So what is SoapUI? Right. So as I said, the SoapUI was the initial tool developed by a company. Now it is taken over by a company called SmartWare. Okay, so SmartWare is a company which is developing and supporting this tool. SoapUI originally was developed as an open source project, so anybody in the world could use it. So now they have two versions, one for the open source community and one a commercial grade version. Okay, so what we are using is the open source community version. It has a very easy to use user interface, okay, which we'll see. Okay, and then you can create and automate your test cases, right? So this tool is designed for creating functional test cases and regression test cases for your SOAP testing or SOAP-based web service testing. Okay, it also supports other like REST. If you want to do, you can do REST services as well. It can allow you to create something called a mock service. Generally, that's a developer function. It's not a test QA function, so we'll not spend time on that. But developers can verify their initial contract and everything using this tool. So that's why it was popular in developer community as well. You can do certain level of load testing with that. So you can do performance testing of your web service as well using this tool. Let's jump into it and understand. Okay. So if you want to use this tool, you start with a project. Okay, so project could be your application, for example. So you can, if you have multiple applications, you can create multiple projects. Okay. So the way it is designed is your project. Right, under that your test suite, and under that test suite your test cases, right? The QA, you know all this, right? What is the test suite, what is the test case, and all of that, right? So basically you execute your functional test cases and then you provide a pass or fail criteria, right? So the functional testing tool, it provides you the whole structure of maintaining your test projects. So you can create your test project, you can create your test suites, you can create your test cases, and then you can run the whole project at once and say, hey, run all my test cases, right? And then it will tell you the results of each of your test case. Make sense? So let's start. So we will concentrate on the SOAP part of it, right? So as I say, we are going to use one of the online service, which is hosted here, called dneonline.com calculator. Okay. So let's start something here, right? So we are going to be our RDP. So go to your machine here. Okay. And before you jump into the tool, can you open the browser? Let's put this website www.online. Millions. We used to have full-fledged website before. So can you type this in and put in the chat if you want? It's dneonline.com/calculator.asmx. The service is developed in C# and hosted on this website. Okay. This is C# code, right? Okay. It is here. So what it does is basically like calculator functionality, right? It allows you to add numbers, divide numbers, multiply numbers, and subtract numbers. Okay. If you want to test it, you can test it also. If you click on add, for example, you will see the SOAP envelope and SOAP response. If you click on add, right?
What's the name of the website?
Okay, let's put this in the chat.
/calculator.asmx.
Oh, I missed the X right. Okay, so when you go to that website, right, we'll first show you the documentation, like what operations it supports. And then if you want to say, okay, if I want to call an add function, right, it will say this is how you have to send the envelope. You see, everything is the envelope here. So this is the SOAP envelope. In the body, you have to specify two numbers you want to add. Right? Like this, right? This is in the envelope, in the body, you specify two integers. Okay, and then it will give you an integer as a result. Make sense? Right? So now, if you were to test it, for example, without SoapUI, right, you will have to write a program, right, which will create this envelope and send it. And then when you get the envelope back, you have to parse that envelope and then look at the results. That's a lot of programming in XML, right? SoapUI automates all of this for you. Okay, SoapUI automates this whole thing. But the first thing is, even before we go here, right? How did you know, right, that you have to supply this, right? Either you can look at this example, or as I said, you can go back here and look at service description. Remember I talked about WSDL, WSDL, which tells you that what operations this service provides and all of that, right? If you click on that, it will show you that document. But that's whole XML file. You'll see a lot of things like this, right? Can you read this? Very cumbersome to read this, right? It's XML, we cannot read, right? With HTML, browser will display you properly. It is an XML, right? So if I have to read this, right, because I have worked with this, I know all the parts of it, right? But let me show you a couple of things here, which you don't need to know, but just for your information, right? It says, you see this element says add, right? So it says in the SOAP, you need to specify an element called add. That element should have two other elements or child elements in the sequence. You specify parameter this and parameter this. The parameter name is INTA, parameter name is INTB. So what it is saying is, when you send me something to add, right, your body should look like this, add, and then it should have two XML elements called INTA and INTB. Not only that, they should be of type integer, right? And then it says in the add response, I am going to send you one integer. The name will be add result. Make sense? Right. So if somebody wants to make this call now, they understand that first in the body I'll put add. Under that I'll put some integer called integer A, integer B, and then when I send it, I'll get an envelope back which will have an add result with the result of the operation. Make sense? Right. So this way they have like specified everything which is needed in order to use this service. And this is how a WSDL looks like. We call it WSDL. Okay. So if somebody asks you in the interview about SOAP, right, they might mention WSDL. WSDL means WSDL, Web Service Description Language, because that is the only document you need as a QA to test it. Okay, because it has everything in order for using that service. Developing that service is a developer's job, but from the QA perspective, what you need to know is how to use that service, how to test the service, right?
So whenever we are doing testing in SOAP, then you need to have the WSDL.
Yeah, you need to know how to call it. If you don't have WSDL, you'll have to go to developer and say, what should I send? And developer will tell you how to send something, right? Make sense? By default, by the standard, every web service provider who provides your service is supposed to expose this document so that anybody who wants to use the service can look at this document and understand how to connect and how to use the service. Make sense?
Is it both SOAP and REST?
No, it's only for SOAP. REST we use, as I said, Swagger and things like that. Okay, but it is not.
Is the WSDL a contract?
Yeah, WSDL also has a contract. So basically, it explains the contract, right? So if you look at it, this is so generally when you read a WSDL, just to give an example, you should start reading from a place where it says port type. Let's see, take the port type here. Not used so for a long time, so
this is the document you will upload to the repository for other consumers to find.
Exactly, right? So port type is like an interface. You see here, it says this is the interface and this is the method. You know Java, right? Interface. In Java interface, what you have is operations, right? Methods. So this is the contract. It says this is the interface. This is the method. Operation is the method. This is the method name. Okay. And then it says, if you want to see what parameters this method takes, you look at this message. What it returns, look at this. Make sense? Yes, no?
Yeah. So the whistle is written like this.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is equivalent to, for example, Java, right? In Java, if I write a method like this, public int add, right? Which takes two parameters, int A, int B, right? If I have to describe this in a WSDL, this is how I describe. I'll say my method name, my interface name is calculator SOAP. So let's say in your Java interface name is calculator SOAP. I'm not writing the whole thing, and then you write a method like this, right? So method, Java method is called operation in SOAP. Right? So you are performing some operations which take certain parameters and then it gives certain output. Make sense? Right? So this is your return type and this is what you're providing as arguments, and this is your method name and this is your interface name. Make sense? So this Java interface if somebody creates a SOAP service from this interface, right? Your WSDL will look like this. And then if I need to find out what is SOAP in, if you go up, it will tell you that SOAP in uses the add, and add has like these two parameters. And then it returns you this, for example. Right? So like we write in method, right? It is described in XML format. Okay. So ultimately when the service provider gets this, it ultimately calls the Java method add with two parameters. And then when it gets output, it then converts into this envelope and then sends it back. That's all a SOAP service is all about. Okay. So now let's see how to use SoapUI and where does it help. Okay. So I'm going to close this. Let's go to SoapUI. The first thing you do is you create a SOAP project. Okay. So click on the SOAP icon here. You can see that. Let's create a SOAP project. So let's create a new SOAP project. Now it will ask you certain information about the project. Right? So let's say we are testing a calculator application which our developers might have developed. So call it a calculator service project, for example. So make it calculate service. Right? And then you see here it says initial wisdom. I need a wisdom. Make sense? Whatever service you are trying to test, it says, give me the wisdom. A wisdom would be a downloaded file on a disk, or you can directly provide a URL. So what URL we've used for the DNE online, I'm going to type it here. The URL for the wisdom is http DNE online. Oh, sorry, it's www, right? www.dneonline.com/calculator.asmx wisdom. Okay. And then you click on this browse button. Oh, sorry, not the browse. Click on the OK button and see if it finds that. Browse is for if you had a wisdom in your local folder, you can upload it from there. If your wisdom location was correct, it will download the wisdom, it will understand the wisdom, and then it will show you your service on the left side. So you see it says calculator SOAP, it picked up from the port type element and name of the service. And it knows that under that service there are 4 operations: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And it also knows that under the add, if you expand, it will say there is a request And then it will tell you what kind of request you need to send in order to test the ad service. Okay. Just for an example, if you just double click on this, it will open a new editor called a request editor. And you will see that it has already created a SOAP envelope for you. So you don't have to do any of this, right? Only what you need to do is fill in the question marks wherever you see the question mark. You see 2 question marks here. Because we know we are calling an add service which takes 2 integers, right? It says to specify your integers here. So just for an example, if I put 100 here and 200 here, make sure that you're only replacing the question mark. Do not touch any other things, otherwise it will disturb the XML structure. Okay. Make sense? Right. So now this is, so let's say you are testing an add function, and then one of your test case was, I'm going to send 100 and 200 and I'm expecting 300 back because I'm doing an add operation. Make sense? So you'll fill out your data and then you can execute the test, execute that request. How do we execute this? Is green button. Just click on that, it will submit the request and it will get the response back. Make sense? Now, if you see there are 2 tabs here, raw and XML, right? So this is a raw response. So if you click on XML, it will give you the SOAP envelope back, the response envelope. You see, it's giving you a result of 300. If you supply 100 and 200, you can supply other numbers as well. It will tell you what is the result. Make sense? It's as easy as this, right? Pick up any wisdom, doesn't matter. Like, you know, if you're doing credit card verification, if you pick up that wisdom, it will give you 4 question marks, right? Your credit card number, name, expiry date, CVV, execute that, it will go to the provider, right? Provider will basically give the response. That response is displayed on the right side. If you see, this is called a request editor. On the left side, you make a request. On the right side, you will get a response. Right? And if you see, that's in the SOAP envelope, according to the SOAP standards. It has an envelope. It does not have a header. Right? In the body, you are specifying whatever that service needs. How do you know what it needs? You don't need to know. SoapUI has already figured it out. Okay, all you need to do is provide the data. Make sense?
Are there instances where authentication is required in SOAP?
Yeah, if it is required, right? So if you see here, there is authentication mechanism, authorization, right? So you can say new authorization method, you can specify your username, password, and things like that. It will then create a header automatically, encrypt it, and send it.
And that would be
in the header.
That would be in WSDL also, right?
Yeah, in the WSDL also it will specify that in the header, does it have a basic authentication or not? So if it is in the WSDL, it will tell you that you have to specify this username and password and everything. You just need to go and fill in the data wherever it says. Make sense? Okay. So as a QA, when you are doing this, right, the first thing is to do a basic sanity test. This is how you will do it. Right? Get the wisdom, get into your project, and then make 2 or 3 calls like this manually. Okay, and then start writing your test cases. Make sense?
So
Okay.
as far as connection, as far as documentation, like test cases, with SOAP, how is going to be done?
Yeah, so we'll go through this. Like, how do you do this, right? So this is just a sanity test, right? So you have a service definition. You go to the service, you say, okay, these are the operations I want to test, right? And then it generates like some sanity method, you test it. And then let's say I want to test add method with like 10 different kinds of data, right? So you can create 10 test cases for that. I'll show you how to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Why aren't there 2 on the left side, add, divide, multiply, recommenders?
So first one is the SOAP 1.1 standard. Second is according to SOAP 1.2 standard. You see, it says calculate SOAP of 1.2.
Yes.
So as I said, there are different versions of SOAP, right? So this particular website from where we are using the web service has implemented both. Right? So you can test either using the SOAP 1.2 version or a previous version of that. That's all. Okay. So far so good. Okay, so now let's do some digging into the tool itself. Second. So as I said, if you look at the structure, there is a particular structure which SOAP follows. Okay. So the first is the project, then you have an interface, and under the interface, basically your service. Under that, you create your test cases. So there's a lot of functionality provided by this tool. So let me go through some of it. So first click on this project which it has created. Okay. And double click on the project. So on the right side, you will see a project information. Just double click on the project, it will show you the project information on the right side. What do you get? It says for this service, right, you have two interfaces. One is according to SOAP 12 standard 1.2, and one is the older SOAP standard. Right? Right now, you do not have any test suites, you do not have any test cases or any test table or anything like that. Okay. And then other parameters. Right now, we don't have anything. This is a project is kind of just an empty project. What you have just specified is these are the services you intend to test. Okay. And then it has a reference to the wisdom from where it created the project. If you go to each of the tabs, it will give you some more information. So you have test suites, for example, which you don't have any right now. There's something called AWS security configuration. This is where you will put your username and password and things like that. So if your web service was using the AWS security standard, where you need to specify username, password, etc., you will add it here. You see here, default username, password, and things like that, and it will encrypt and create the headers for that. And then it says security scan result. So it can do security scanning as well. If you want to do security scanning of your services, you can run the test from here. You can add the test and run it. Okay. If you now go at the interface level of the service level, just double click on that. You will see slightly different information. So now you're at one step underneath your project level, and then you're at the service level now. So it says the visual URL. You see the namespace we are talking about? Right, so it says this visual uses this namespace, which is tempuri.org, for example. Right? If it was IBM, it will say IBM.com, right? From where you are referring to the visual. Okay. The SOAP version you can see is 1.1. Correct. If I do the other one, it will say 1.2, for example. Okay. And then the SOAP style of communication is document. Okay. So those are some of the information about your interface, and these are the 4 operations. Make sense? Right. So add operation, divide, multiply, and subtract. If you want to look at service endpoints, it will tell you which endpoints your test case is going to hit for this. Okay. If you add security, you will provide like username, password, and things like that here. If you want to see the visual itself, you can click on this visual contact. It will show you the whole XML like this. Remember, this is what we are showing in the browser. But on the left side, you have the categories. If you wanted to look at something, for example, what are the interfaces? You can directly look in the port types and click on this. It will directly go to the XML at that position. So you can quickly navigate the XML instead of like in the browser, I have to do Control F and the port type, right? Here, I can directly go and check. So if I want to see what is part of divide, I can click here. It will go to that part of the wisdom. Make sense? Right? So it makes visual navigation very quick and easier. So if developer was checking this, or as a tester, you wanted to check something in the visual, like why it is not, for example, showing up this operation, you want to look at the visual, right? You might want to investigate here. Okay, so this is for visual navigation. There's also something called WSI compliance. There is a lot of things done around SOAP. So WSI compliance is basically if the service complies to all the SOAP rules or not. So what happens is when you're standard, there is always a deviation. Makes sense? When you're standard, there is always a deviation. Okay. So a provider can adopt the standard, but they might not adopt the 100% of the standard. They might say 97% or 96% or 95% or 80%. Right? Just an example, HTML is a standard. Hypertext markup. We all heard HTML, right? It's a standard, right? What is the advantage of a standard? So that everybody can implement the same way, right? Why your browsers look the same? Meaning, and if you open any browser, right? And if you open any site, they look the same in all the browsers. How come?
Control. Control. The same standard.
It's the same standard. They're using HTML standard, right? So they look at the HTML standard, and HTML standard says that if you have a tag, then you should be underlining that text. That's a standard rule. So every browser follows that rule. And since they follow the rule, that website looks exactly same. Either it is developed by Google Chrome, or is it developed by Mac Safari or Firefox. The page will look exactly same, but not quite. Okay. All of these follow HTML standard, but they are not compliant fully. They are not 100% compliant. Okay. Some browsers are 80% compliant, some browsers are 95%, some browsers are 98%. Makes sense? So they take some deviations just in order to make user experience better. So they implement certain standards against the standard rules. Okay, so sometimes what happens is some website might look slightly different in certain web browsers because they have deviated from the standard. Same thing with the SOAP. SOAP is set of rules. Okay, so now if I want to use that service, right, I need to know, are they fully compliant or how much they are compliant, right? How do I know? So Web Service Standards Committee has created a set of test cases which you execute against that's provider and then find out are they compliant or not. This tab is for that. It says WSI compliance, Web Service Interface Standard Compliance. If I run this, it's going to run all the tests and tell me that this particular web service, how much it is compliant against the standard. If you want to do that, you see this green button? Just click on that. It will start running all the compliance tests against the web service. Then it will give you the report. Since there is each test case, and then it will say pass or fail. These are the compliance IDs. It is saying which ones are passing. Green means it's passing fully. Blue means it's partly compliant, right? If I'm worried about this, let's say this standard, I can find out, why it is partly compliant. Because when I consume, if I'm using this part of the standard, I should be careful by using this service. Make sense? Right? It will tell you how it tested, what is the result, is it pass, fail, or what? Not applicable, for example. Make sense? Right? So what people do is before they use the service, they check this. If they're not compliant, they may not want to use the service. Make sense? So what SoapUI does, it runs all the tests and tell you how much is the service provider compliant with the SOAP rules.
Are you talking about from a consumer's point of view?
Yeah, consumer's point of view, because I want to use the service, right? But then I'm going to use it in a standards way, right? Because if it is not standard compliant, maybe it's possible that I might get some unexpected result if I use that service in a particular way.
So as a QA, we will be testing the web service that our company or whoever developed.
You might also do compliance tests as well, and telling developers, hey, we are not compliant with this, make sure that your code complies with this.
And then, so the web service, which program is that used to develop the web?
You can use any language.
So then what is the difference between that and Wisdom? The program that is written in and then Wisdom itself?
Wisdom is just a contract. It's like a Swagger documentation, right? Makes sense. Did you use Swagger? No, perfect.
Is
So-
it like the acceptance criteria, like when you do testing?
No, it is your test case specification. Wisdom is your test case specification. Let it put this way.
Oh, just, yeah, because the acceptance criteria is like. overall,
Acceptance
like,
criteria is
even
yours,
if
right?
it's
If I call an ad with 100 and 200, then my acceptance criteria is that it should send me 300 back,
Yes.
right? So that's up to you as a tester, but it tells you what to send. Make sense?
Okay.
Right? It tells you that you have to specify 2 integers. That's a test case description.
But the Wisdom doesn't give you what to send, right?
No, it says, Wisdom tells you that you have to specify these 2 parameters. It doesn't tell you test data which you're going to use.
Okay, okay,
Make sense?
okay, and now I know. So,
Right? There is a method, but in order to use that method, you should know what parameter to specify, which is there in the Wisdom. But what parameters you will actually specify is based on your test case.
okay.
Do the developers use this like to do some of the tests themselves? Or is it?
Yeah. So when the developer wants to see if my web service is working, right? They'll just go to SoapUI, double click here, and then they'll send some parameters and see if the web service is functioning. Makes sense?
Yeah, I think if you wanna do, because sometimes probably you will report like a bug, but it's not actually the developer's fault. It's from the web service. It's not returning the right thing. So you could test it before you report it and you will see, and you will report it as a web service issue. Am I right or wrong? If you use SOAP,
Or the developer is the one that's writing the code so that they're the one that developing the web service?
no, I'm not talking about the developer of the web service. I'm talking about the developer of like a website or an app. So if you're testing something and it's not returning the right data, but if you report it as a bug, the developer will go and check his code and it will see nothing wrong with it. So the developer probably will go check the web service, what it's returning.
No, I mean, web service is returning what developer has written. Makes sense?
Not the developer of the web service, of the application. If we're testing like
So
something
so,
like has a UI.
okay, so if I understand.
I think I'm not using the right words, but that's
So what you're saying is the application is using the web service, right?
yes.
And then application is saying, hey, add 2 numbers 10 and 20, right? But the web service says 40, right? So
No, I'm not talking like based on data. I'm talking based on like a UI. For example, if you click here, it should take you to this page, for example.
Mhm.
And you click here will take you to another page,
Mhm.
but that's not from the application development. That's from the web service that's returning something else.
the web service is just a specification. Web service by itself is nothing, right? So I created a calculator. So we are looking at a web service called calculator, which somebody has developed. Makes sense?
Yes. Yeah, now here, if something that means it's a developer, like
Right.
whoever developer.
Right. So what you do as a consumer is basically follow the specification, call the service, and then look at the results.
Okay,
Make sense?
yes.
Right? So right now what we are saying is that this compliance report tells you that developer has developed the web service according to the web service standards or not. Make sense?
Yes, okay.
right? So if they've not followed certain standards, it will say that, okay, these test cases fail, and then you are responsible. So as a consumer, if you want to still use it, you can still use it, but you have to be careful where the test cases are failing. Makes sense?
So the developers would understand, like, if we miss that, this is the part that is not testing.
Yeah, so developer would then try to comply with it. They will change their code to make sure that they are in compliance. Okay. All right, so this is what you will get as part of the SoapUI. You can run the compliance test and then report it to the developer if you're expecting all the compliance to pass or not. Okay, so that's first thing you will do. And then you can go and individually test each of these methods, right? Let's see how do you develop your test case. Make sure that we are not missing anything.
I asked Tushar if Postman doesn't have a connection with Jira. Does SOAP connection here or not?
Most of these tools have connections.
Like plugins?
So what these tools do is they allow you to create a connector if one is not available. Makes sense? So you can look for the plugins, right? Or you can develop your own plugins. Okay. So let's, so we did this, so look at the interface. So now let's create a test case. Okay, so go back to your SoapUI. Let's say I want to, I'm fine, I check the ad surveys, sanity is passing. I want to really now create a test case, which I'll be using for my regression, right? So how do you do that? So one of the things you have to remember is, like, whenever you open any tab, that tab opens on the right side. So if you want to close, let's close all of them. So this area is clean. And then right click on your request, which you use to the sanity test. And then you will see different options here, menu options, right? One of them is to add to test case. So click on add to test case. The first thing it will say is you don't have a test suite. You don't have a test suite, so you have to create a test suite. Okay, so let's create a test suite called TS Cloud. You know what the test suite is, right? I'm not going to go into details of how to do that. But let's say you create a test suite called TS Cloud. And then this is your first test case. So you say, hey, TC add one, because I'm creating a test case to test the add method, right? I'll create TC. Generally, this is the prefix we used to give in the scope, just to say if it's a test case or test suite. Okay. And then click on OK. Now it will ask you certain questions, because now you are creating a test case. Right? It says, what do you want to test? What do you want me to help you with? Okay, the first thing is add SOAP response assertion. You see it is checked. Now you know what is an assertion mean, right?
Assertion is, yes, like making sure.
What is assertion?
Expected value and whatever value comes
Comparing
in the system.
What does the QA does? What is the job of a QA?
Validates.
Validated.
Verification. Assertion is a verification. Okay. In developer community, we call it assertion. Okay. Whoever is the developer, right? And when developer uses a verification, they don't use a word called verification. They always use the word assertion. Remember, this tool was originally developed for the developers. So that's why it uses the word assertion, not the verification. If the QA tool, it will say verification or validation. Assertion is a developer word. They use it like when you write unit test cases, you say assert this, assert that, right? So assertion is the verification. Okay, so it says add SOAP response assertion means, should I check that the response is valid SOAP envelope or not? because that SoapUI can do automatically because it knows what is the envelope looks like. Okay, so if you want to put that validation, you can check mark that. So by default, it is check mark, means it's going to verify if the response is valid SOAP or not. And there are a few other checkboxes. Add schema assertion. Right? I talked about the schema, right? It can validate against the schema, but then you need a schema for that. So that's why by default it is not checked. But if you add a schema and if you want your SoapUI to validate against the schema the response, right? You can do that. So all those verifications will be done automatically without you writing a single line of code. Okay, so you can do that. Add non-SOAP fault assertion. That means if it can also check that not only that response is coming back is a SOAP, but it will also validate the response coming back is not an error. Okay, so as part of the SOAP standard, they had a rules how to say if there's an error. So for example, like in REST, right? When you post something, right? Or you send any request, how do you verify that the response is successful? We call it as, we check the HTTP code, right? 200, 300, 400. SOAP is not like that. SOAP doesn't look at the HTTP code. SOAP has one element which will say it is a successful response or is it an error. If it is a successful response, you will get the body back, the SOAP body back. But if it is not successful, then instead of body, you will see fault. So the server will send you fault element in the XML. So it is saying not only I can verify that it is a valid SOAP envelope, I can also verify that it is not a fault, means it did not return you an error. Because if you want to verify, you can put that validation here as well. Okay, so if I want to say, hey, I want to check, make sure that the response I'm getting is not a fault or it's not an error, because by default it is an error. I want to just say it is it's a defect, for example, because I'm not expecting error. Okay, and then there are other few things here. Okay, which is not related to validations, but things like close the request window and things like that. Which is fine, you don't need to worry about. So first three are for the validations, which can be done by UI automatically. And once you specify all these details and you say, okay, you will see on the left side, your structure will change. Now under your project, you have a test suite. Under the test suite, you have a test case. Right? So for example, if you're creating a regression test suite, then you put all the regression test cases under that. Right? If you're creating sanity test suite, then you'll put all your sanity test under that. Make sense? Right? So I have test suite, I have a test case. And in the test case, I have a test step. So if you're calling one method, it's a single test step, right? Make sense? In QA, when you write a test case, you write your steps.
Yes.
Make sense? Right? So this is a web service call is one of the steps. Right? If your functional test requires 2 or 3 web service calls, you can put that in the same test. Saying first execute this test web service, then execute this web service, then execute this web service. Or you can have one test step per test case, saying, hey, just test add, and then create another test case for delete, for example. Make sense? Or subtract. So once you do this, right, on the right side, you will see that your test case now. It says TC. It's no more a request. So your test case, underneath that, you have a test step called add request 1. Make sense? Right? Now what you can do is you can run a test case. So if you run this, it will say green or red. If your test case passes, it is green. If your test case fails, it is red. How do you know it is green and passing? Because we did not put any verification much, right? We just said, hey, verify if the incoming or the response is proper SOAP or not. It just verifies, sends a request, gets it. If it is valid, it's a good. pass, right? Now you can put more validations around this. Okay, we'll look at that. But if you look at the output, it says test started, test finished. It has one step and it is green. Make sense? Right? Okay. Now, let's see. So this is your request and test. So this is the structure, your project, your test suite, your test case, right? So if I wanted to run all the regression test cases, I can run the test suite itself at this level. It will run all the test cases under that. Makes sense? If I want to run all the sanity tests, I will run my sanity test case suite. Okay, so you have a test suite, then your test case. Under the test case, you have a request. Right? This is the request which gets executed. Make sense? If you open the request, these are the parameters we are specifying, right? You can change the parameters. If you want to add another request saying, hey, I want to put 20 and 30, right? You can do that as well. Right? So when you put a request, you need to make sure that you use the correct test data for your test. So far, so good?
Yes.
Okay, so this is how you execute a basic web service test. Okay, create a test suite, create a test case. Under the test case, put your web service request, whatever you want to make, and then specify the test data and execute. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see what was next. So we created a test case. Okay. Now, how do you add validations, right? There are different kinds of validations you can add to your test cases, right? Because our job is not to just run and see what is coming up, right? You have to validate if it is the response is correct or not, for example, right? There are different kind of validations you can do here. Okay, so let's go back here to your hierarchy, go to the request. And then you will see in under that request editor, where you see the request and response, underneath that you will see assertions. You see these assertions? Assertions are all the verification you are performing on this request. Right now it says 2, right? Click on that, it will say what it is validating. So it is validating 2 criteria. One, that incoming response is valid SOAP message, and 2, it is not a fault. And both are passing in our case. Makes sense? Both are passing, right? So now let's say I wanted to add some more validations, right? In order to do that, you see this plus sign here? Click on plus. It will show up a dialog box like this, which says add assertion. Any additional verifications you want to do it, you put it here. Okay. Now it has categories of the validations it can do. There is a property content validation. There is a compliance validation. There is an SLA validation. There are different kinds of validations you can do. So click on SLA first. What does SLA stand for? Anybody? SLA? You're going to work in QA, you need to be very comfortable with this stuff. Okay. Because you will hear this kind of acronyms, right? And you should not be, oh, what he's saying. SLA. The service level agreements.
There's no some timings.
Yeah. So typically, you talk about service level agreements and different SLAs. So somebody will talk about, hey, our SLA is this, your SLA is this, right? SLA means a service level agreement. For example, developers teams to develop this functionalities SLA is 10 days. In 10 days, they have to implement the functionality, right? So in web service testing, you can do an SLA testing. SLA you can do on the response. So this is kind of a performance level verification. You can say that my response SLA is, let's say, 200 milliseconds or 50 milliseconds or 1 second. What it means is that when I call this web service, it should respond within particular milliseconds, a number of milliseconds. If it is not responding me, I'm going to fail it. Even if it responds later and gives me the right result, I'm going to fail that test case because it did not respond in time. Make sense? You can add a verification like this. Okay, so let's say I want to put a response SLA. So you select this. Yeah, select this and then say add. It will ask you what is the SLA you're looking for. So by default, it's saying 200 milliseconds. Right? Let's say I want this service to be responding within 40 milliseconds. It will immediately execute and say it is red. Your SLA is not passing. Make sense? That means out of 3 verification criteria, one of the criteria is failing. So if I run my test case now, it will fail. Make sense?
It says 249 over 40. That means the minimum is 249.
But it says that's the actual it took.
Oh,
Your expected is 40, your actual is this
okay.
much.
Was the actual one.
Right? So right now for me, it is saying 152 or 40. That means it took actual 152, your criteria was 40. Makes sense? Expected result versus actual result. It will show you why it is failing. Right? So at this point, if I run the test case, it will say fails because it is not meeting my verification criteria. Make sense? Right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go back and put this back to the 500. So at least it passes. Okay. So now I have 3 assertions. All of the 3 are passing. Make sense? You'll notice there is no code here. You just specify what you're verifying, right? We haven't written a single line of code yet.
But the
Right.
only thing we're gonna need the XML, like, and at least understand it.
You just need wisdom. You don't need to understand. Let SoapUI understand it. That's not your business.
Yeah, but WSDL is written with.
It doesn't matter. Wisdom is developer's responsibility. He exposes the wisdom. Whoever develops the service provider will provide you the wisdom.
And once it's uploaded in the SoapUI, that's it.
Yeah,
It's
that's
gonna
it.
use it
Yeah,
itself.
so it will understand. You don't have to interpret anything in the wisdom.
Oh wow.
What you do is this, what I'm showing you here on the screen,
Okay.
right? Go to a method, create a request, right? And create test cases and put the verifications.
That's why they call it UI.
Yeah, so it's a user interface which allows you to do soap testing.
Okay.
Because generally there is no user interface involved in machine-to-machine communication. All right, so let's say I want to check if I add 20 and 30, let's say, for example, let me run this. My expected result is 50, for example, right? I want to check if it is actually 50, right? If it sends me 60, I want to fail this, right? I can add this verification as well. How do I do that? So go back to the assertion, click on plus, and look at the property content. So this is where you want to verify the content of your response. Make sense? And there are different content verifications, right? Because it is XML, it has disabled some of them. Like for example, JSON related, all of those are disabled because it's not JSON, it's an XML, right? So you can check that, hey, it should match certain things in my verification. So if I say contains, that means I'm checking if something is in my response, right? So right now, if you look at your response, it looks like this, right? Like this, right? I want to verify that, click on contains, and then say add. and you can put your verification code here. So I can say that if my response comes back, it should have the content like this. I'm expecting, because I'm doing 20 and 30, I'm expecting the results should have 50 in the add result element. So I can say that my response should have this element with this number 50. So if developer had made a mistake and if he's sending 60, my test case will fail. Make sense? Good. I put this. Okay, if you want to ignore the case and all that, there are certain checkboxes here. Okay, ignore the case means if the R is in the small case, you want to ignore that, right? If you want to do that, you can put that. Otherwise, you say okay. It will run that as well. It will say your expected and actual result is same or not.
So when we did from the tab where it says calculator, SOAP, and then add request one, when we sent in the two numbers and we got a response, it was not necessarily the right response. It was just saying that we are getting a response.
No. It was sending a response, whatever the service provider was sending.
Right.
But now we are verifying that it is as per our expectation.
Right. So that the top one where we did that.
Yeah, that doesn't verify.
It doesn't verify.
That doesn't verify.
Okay, so it's just saying that we got a response.
No, yeah, what it is saying is this is what I got from the server.
Okay.
Now you decide it is
Right or wrong.
right or wrong. But now we are putting that in the criteria, so it can do by itself. We don't have to go and actually check if it is 50 or not. Makes sense?
Yes.
Right? So for example, if I wanted to fail that, right? If I go to here and say I'm expecting 60, for example, right? Will fail. Yeah, I got 50. You're asking me to have 60, right?
Yes, yes.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
So this is how you provide your assertion criteria here. Right? Because this is the key thing for QA, right? You need to verify, right? It's not that you send something, you get something. That doesn't mean that's a test, right? Test should have a test data, test specification, steps, and then your expected and actual results, right? Expected results. Then a tool can compare it with the actual result and can tell you if all your verification criteria are passing or not. Make sense? Right, so your test data, your test facts, your steps, and verification points, all of them can be automated here like this. Right? So you're not writing any code. Like in Postman also, you would have done the same thing, right? In Postman, you have to write some JavaScript to validate your responses, right? So for example, if you are calling a JSON, right? In JSON, you're expecting something, right? You put that in the verification criteria. Yeah, Postman uses JavaScript for that. Okay. Here is all UI driven. You provide in the UI, right? And then it will verify it automatically. Make sense? Right? So this is how you develop your test cases around the web service. Make sense? Right? So structure is test suite, test case, request, and then in the request you put all your verification criteria. So right now we have put 4 criteria for one request. Right? You can now keep adding the request with different criteria, and then at the end of the day, you want to run it everything together, right? So you can go at the project level and say, hey, run this whole project. For example, you had 50 suites and 1,000 test cases, it will run everything and give you a nice report at the end saying these are the passes, these are the fails. Make sense? Right? So this is what this core of the tool is all about, right? To make sure that you don't need to do any SOAP or anything like that. You as a QA, just identify your interfaces, identify the methods you want to test, and then create the request for each set of the data which you want to test, and then specify a verification. Okay, so this is the core of the tool, but then it also provides you other tests. For example, you can do load testing. So you can do performance testing on your web service, right? So you guys know about performance testing a bit. What is a load testing?
Load testing is on and accessing it at the same time.
So load testing is, let's say right now, whatever we are doing, whatever we have created is a functional test, right? We are testing a functionality. Does the add service work or add method work according to the specs or not? Means if I say 10 plus 10, does it tell me it is 20? That's a functional testing. Makes sense, right? Which you can automate with this. But then if I run my test, let's say not one person, but let's say 100 people are accessing that at the same time, right? Then does it work according to the functionality or not? Make sense, right? So those kind of tests also you can do using SoapUI. Okay, so you can do load testing of service and see how that service scales with the user load. Right, so initially, whenever we are doing this testing, it's saying, hey, within 200 milliseconds, I can give you the result. But will that be the same case if I have 10,000 requests at the same time?
No.
Maybe not. How do you test it? You can create a load test for that. Let me use a quick example. So go to your load test here, right click, and then say new load test. And say I want to create load test for add method. Say load test underscore add. And then you will come up with a screen like this. It's a rudimentary load testing, but it's a good one for simple web services. So you specify a load testing criteria. This screen shows you the criteria of and the setting. It's not a criteria, I would say configuration of your load test. Okay. So if you see certain parameters here, for example, it says limit 60 seconds. What it means is run this test for 1 minute. Run this test for 1 minute. Okay, you can change this criteria to total runs per thread and things like that. Okay, we'll not go too much detail here, but it says, let's say we want to run this test for 1 minute. Okay, and then what you want to say is in 1 minute, whatever the load is generated, you give me the results for that. Okay. Number of threads. Number of threads means number of users. Typically, if Google wants to do the load testing, right? How many people are using Google at the same time? Few million, right? If they want to test it, can they find few million users to test the service? No, right? They have to employ this million people, right? Instead of that, this is what they will be doing, right? They create a 1 million threads. Right? Computer can do it, right? The computer will say, hey, I want to generate load of 1,000 people. Right? We do that. 1,000 users, 2,000 users, 10,000 users. How? For each user, it will create separate thread and then start hitting the service. So right now it is saying 5 threads means I want to load test with 5 user load. Means 5 users will be calling the service at the same time. Make sense? So now if you read this, I want to simulate 5 users calling this service at the same time for 1 minute. Okay, that's what we have specified here. 60 seconds, which is 1 minute, 5 users. Okay. The strategy, let's not go too much into here, but simple strategy means whatever I told you, you do that. If I want to really do stress testing, I can run it in the burst mode. Okay, burst mode means, so when I said like 5 users will be testing this method at the same time, right? It's not exactly in milliseconds same, right? It might be slightly here and there. So what I'm saying is over the 1 minute period, average number of users using this at the same time is 5. Makes sense, right? But if I want to say no, exactly, they should exactly at the same millisecond, everybody should all this service, then I can use it a burst mode. Okay, so there are different modes in which you run the load testing. So we are going to go the average mode, for example. Test delay says like how much delay I should have between the tests. Right? Because a lot of applications will need some breathing time when you do this performance testing. So you can induce your own test delay and the randomness. Randomness is like if I put 5 users, right? What is the delay between the 5 users? So it is saying random is 0.5, right? So there is a difference of like 0.5 seconds between the users. That's what we are saying. So you can create a strategy according to your needs. But ultimately what's going to happen is once you specify this and click on this red button, it will run this. Since I said for 1 minute, this test will run for 1 minute. It will keep hitting that service. So 5 users are continuously hitting the service. And you see the results in the table.
So is it 5 users will test it in 1 minute?
They will keep testing for a minute.
Also, they're testing for whatever the delay and the random.
Yeah, based on the delay and the randomness, they are just checking it. So you will see, you will get a count at the end of the minute, like how many times the total times the service was called.
And then what is, I didn't understand the difference between the delay and the random. So delay is 1000 milliseconds.
Yeah, 1000 milliseconds.
And so what is the random?
Random means the delay multiplied by the randomness will be given to each user. We call it think time in terms of load testing. So let me show you the result first and I'll explain what the think time is. But you can see here, for this configuration, ultimately what happened was this service was called 355 times in 1 minute. Okay, which is, think about like 60 seconds and 5 users, right? If each user is calling this service on average per second, it will be 5 multiplied by 60, right? It's about 300, and based on the randomness and test delay distributed, so it's about 355 count. You see, if I increase this, you will see less counts here, right? So one second delay is not a fixed delay, but there is a randomness created. So like one user is calling the service maybe every 0.5 seconds. Another user is calling every 1 second. Another user is calling every 0.75 seconds. Make sense? Right? Provided the service can also respond within the time. So if you see the timings here, the minimum, maximum, and average time is the average response times. So for 355 calls, right, the average time it took to respond is 81 milliseconds. Out of that, maximum is 249. So somebody got a 249 millisecond response. Make sense? Somebody got a 69 millisecond response. So it never got less than 69. It did not go more than 249. And if you count average, it's 355. Make sense? What we have generated is a TPS, transactions per second, or we call it throughput. This means this service is able to handle almost 6 transactions per second, means 6 calls per second. Make sense? Right? So we run it for 1 minute. It is saying that I can, so within this time period, it can handle 6 transactions per second with this timings. Right? So these are all very important things when you do performance testing of web service, because web service you don't know how many people are going to use. Okay, and you might have to check out from some load testing. So for example, if I now, so instead of 5, let's mimic 15 users. Okay, and let's run it for 1 minute again, and let's see if the results changes.
So The load testing results vary from computer to computer?
Yeah, it would. Because you are a client and then the service is responding, right? So it depends on what is the network delay you have and things like that. How fast is your internet? Right? It depends on all of those parameters.
What is the significance of those two? I'm still not.
Which one?
The test delay and the random.
Test delay, on average, I want a test delay of 1 second. That's what I'm saying.
Is it on average or the minimum?
On average, meaning I don't want a fixed delay of 1 second. Meaning I don't want, so for example, there are 5 users, right? First user sends a request. I'm saying average delay I want is 1 second, right? With a variability of 50%, right? So from 500 milliseconds to 1.5 milliseconds, you will see the delay. Sorry, 500 milliseconds to 1.5 seconds. You see 0.5, 50% allowance I'm giving. So somebody might be hitting at 500 milliseconds. Somebody might hit with the delay of 1.5 seconds. Average delay I want is 1 second. That's what I'm saying.
And then that's the 0.5.
That's the 0.5, the randomness. Right? Otherwise, if I do 0 randomness, that means every user will call the service after 1 second. Right? But then that will not be the real world test. Think about like Google, right? People take a think time. So when you go to search, right? Some people are already, they know what they want to search, right? So they'll type it and then search. Some people will think, what should I write here? We call it think time. Let's say if I have to mimic 1 million users, I might say, 25% of the users will search within 1 second. 30% of the users might spend 10 seconds before they start the search, right? So I put all this randomness and then I perform a load testing, right? So all these parameters are needed for simulating a real world scenario. Right? For computer, I can say 0, just keep hitting, right? I don't want any delay, right? But it will not give me the right results. Because in real world, people take time before calling a server.
So what do you mean by when they take time? Like
think time.
No, I'm talking about the example that you just said. Okay, as far as Google, are you talking about time that they take from entering or opening the website to the thing?
Click on the search button. I open the page and then I click the search. There's a time delay between that, right?
Opening the page and clicking the search.
Yeah.
Okay, then.
Makes sense? Yeah. Somebody will type faster and then click search. Somebody would think, oh, but what I wanted to search, okay, let me put this, right? Somebody will take 10 seconds. Somebody might take 50 seconds, right? So you need to simulate the real world scenario. That's what this parameter are for. Make sense? So now, if you see, our average would have slightly gone up because I am simulating with 15 users, right? If I have to go in the burst mode, it will be very high because now I'm saying, don't care about all this. You see here, burst, it changes this, right? It says burst delay and then burst duration. So it says for 10 seconds, keep hitting this at the same time. All the users should hit this at the same time. If I do this, I should have very different results. You see now, nothing is going up. But we put the 60 seconds. Right?
Yeah.
So it says, you have 47 seconds left before everybody is going to hit the service at the same time. Just to 10 seconds, just to show you quickly. So after 1 minute, everybody is going to boom, all the servers. So this is generally done for the stress testing part.
Our limit is also 60 seconds. Our limit is also 60 seconds and bus delay is also 60 seconds.
Yes, it will do only one call.
Only one call.
Right. So it is done to do stress testing if component will fail on a high load, right? If every request arrived at exactly at the same millisecond, right? You see now, says 179 millisecond it took, right? And then it had only one count, right? Transactions per second is 4.4. Makes sense, right? So you can do different testing like this. You can do burst mode, burst and simple mode you can do. I mean, thread testing also you can do, but what it means is you're doing everything per thread, which is slightly more complex than these two modes. But these two are the typical modes where you will do the load test, perform the load testing. One is the average load testing, another is the stress testing, right? So you can put this and then create different load tests for the web service. The idea is that whenever you publish a web service, right, somebody, I mean, whoever is using need to know what is the response time your web service is going to give. Do the client will have to wait for 2 seconds or 60 seconds or 50 seconds? So based on that, they will put that timeouts in their code. Make sense? So this gives you an idea of how it works. Now, given that SoapUI is not really a load testing tool, I mean, you might use JMeter or something like that. But if you really wanted to do SOAP-based web service testing, this is a good starting point. Okay, just quickly check and tell your developers if you're seeing a lot of delays, right, with like simple criteria, your developers can go and fix the performance problems in the web services. Not only that, when it is executing this load test, it is also executing a verification criteria. Okay, so for example, if you run this test and you hit the service for 350 times, out of 350 times, let's say for 50 requests, right, it did not meet a verification criteria, it will say 355 times I did this, or 350 times, but success rate was 300. That means actually it is failing for the 50 out of the 300 requests. Okay, so that will tell you as well that when your service is under the load test, right, your service is failing. Okay, so that also needs to be fixed. Okay, so as part of this load test, it also executes verification every time. Sometimes if you don't want to do that, you can disable the verification. Then you will get a better response. Okay, but this is what you can do with this tool. Okay, again, as I said, this tool is very useful not only in the SoapUI testing, you can do REST testing as well with SoapUI. Make sense? Let's see what to cover this. I'm going to upload this documents on the classroom, the PDF and all of that, and then for your homework, okay, you have 3 more methods here which you're supposed to test. Okay, so make sure that you create requests for all of these, create the test cases, put your verification criteria, test it, and also create a load test for at least one of them and see with different criteria how it responds. Make sense? Okay, so I'll put, I think, sir puts in the forum, right? I'll put your homework and everything on the forum. So you'll see that next time. Okay, but that's what we wanted to cover on SOAP. Again, given the SOAP is not a very popular standard nowadays, but there are lots of services out there using the SOAP standard. So from a testing perspective, it is very important. Next time we'll be talking about Karate and then how to automate your API tests. On the Postman, what you have done is you've tested it, right? You may not have necessarily automated it. Automated means I start the test, I go home and I sleep. Next day I have results ready, right? So if you wanted to do that kind of testing, a better tool, what's a tool, a framework to use is Karate. There's another one of the things you need to know from the QA perspective. Okay, because a lot of organizations, they use all the tools. They use Postman, they use Karate, they use SoapUI. Okay, so Karate is a bit of development. So I hope your Java skills are still good. Okay, and we will write. Yeah, so you need to at least refresh your Java because it will create a project in Java in order to do the automated testing for Agile. Okay, so we'll talk about that next week. Thank you. Is there any questions before we close for today?
You will be teaching for the next class?
Yeah, so next class I'll
We just need to remember to end or stop the instance.
Oh, yeah,
Because I forgot it last night. They charge per day?
Per
they
hour.
charge per hour.
Per hour.
In fact, per second, not per minute.
I'll check my credit card out.
But you might have some free allowance. If you are within free allowance, you can have idea. Okay?
So now we had it for like open for 3 hours. We're not charged.